Question number 4, Phil Twyford.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is for the Minister for Building and Housing. Does he stand by his statement, "I am open to having more information on overseas ownership, but I do not favour a register? If so, why?"
Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, yes. And I stand by the full statement, which I think answers the second part of the question. I am open to having more information on overseas ownership, but I do not favour a register. For it to be accurate, it would need to trace not only the 80,000 houses per year that are sold, but the 1 million plus people who come and go from New Zealand. That is because a significant number of overseas home owners are people who are in the process of gaining residency, and for the register to be accurate, it would need to race people's immigration and residency status.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Does he still think that a register of foreign buyers is crude and xenophobic, now that the Prime Minister and Finance Minister think it's an idea that's worth looking at?
Mr Speaker.
Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, what the Minister of Finance said yesterday was perfectly in line with what I said, which is that we're open-minded about whatever gives us more information, and that is certainly what the Minister of Finance said as well. What we also, I noticed that the Minister of Finance stated, which is the point, is that the problem particularly with the Auckland market is that there's not enough supply. And to free up supply, we need to look at the land that is available. We need to look at local government's rules and regulations as to how we are issuing consents and freeing up land, and that without a doubt would have the biggest influence on house prices.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Will he advise the Finance Minister what he told the House, that a foreign buyers register would be a waste of money and would cost many millions of dollars, now that the Finance Minister thinks it's an idea worth considering?
Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Minister, obviously the member's having trouble understanding, so what I would say is that the Minister of Finance...
Order. Again, it's an example of the disorder that can be created with an answer from a minister. Would the minister address the question as asked?
Mr Speaker, so what happened is actually the member... Oh, that's rather... Yeah, let's hope that is, because that's really nice towards a woman in the House.
Answer the question, please.
So, yeah, I'm sure you'd do that to a man, wouldn't you? So what I would like to say is actually the Minister of Finance, as I've already stated, actually was quite clear that he is not calling for a register. He's saying more information is good. I think we all agree on that, but what we don't think is that it is the main reason that we have house prices where they are.
Supplementary.
Order. I haven't called the member yet. Order. And that, comments coming from both sides have not been helpful. I accept that. I'm now calling Phil Twyford to ask a supplementary question.
Now that his government is open to the idea of a register of offshore speculators, will he also listen to what New Zealanders are saying and adopt the policy of the Australian Parliament and the New Zealand Labour Party restricting residential property ownership to residents and citizens?
Honourable Paula Bennett.
Well, as we've seen, it doesn't work in Australia. What we are more interested in is increasing supply of both affordable houses and others so that we can see those New Zealanders that want access to the market have access to it. And that is actually working alongside local government, making sure we've got the RMA in the right place, and that is this government's focus.
Supplementary.
Supplementary question, Phil Twyford.
Why did it take an Australian parliamentary committee and a press release from Andrew Little to change the government's mind when the Reserve Bank had already called for the collection of more data? All the opposition parties in this House called for controls on offshore speculators. 83% of New Zealanders asked for a register. Or is this just a poll-driven recognition that government's housing policy has failed and has become an electoral liability?
Honourable Paula Bennett.
Mr Speaker, the member can try and rewrite the words of the Minister of Finance yesterday, but they are not factual, what he has said. We stand by what was said, we stand by where we are, and we are interested in seeing New Zealanders have better access to affordable housing in Auckland.
In the light of that Minister's answer,
Order. Is this a point of order or a supplementary?
Yes, it is. It's a
point of order.
In the light of the Minister's answer, I move for the Register for Foreign Ownership Bill in my name be pulled from the ballot and debated right now.
Order. The member's been here a long time. He needs to seek leave to do that. The member needs to do things properly.
The Speaker, sorry. My apologies. I seek leave. In the light of the epiphany the Minister's just expressed on behalf of the government, for the bill standing in my name and in my name in the ballot to be pulled from the ballot and debated by Parliament right now.
Order. I'll put the leave and the House will decide leave sought for that particular course of action. Is there any objection? Question number 5. Dr. Jan Yang.